Okay, we're ready to begin. Ready to begin. Our time is limited, so we shouldn't waste any of it. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, we've got a very special person in the audience who I want to introduce. You heard about my colleague who I started this program with 20 years ago. That's Achi Fujioka. I'd like to introduce him, have him stand up. We're very lucky that Akihiko Kirijima picked up where Achi left off. But for those of us who have been doing this for a lot of years, we very much miss Achi. It'd be wonderful if we could have Achi and Aki do it. Achi just organized a big global conference about the militarization and weaponization of space. So he hasn't been with us before. But I want all of you to get to know him. So if you have a chance, say hi to him afterwards so you can get to know Achi Fujioka, one of the most special people I know. Hello, everyone. But tonight's speaker is our first speaker. We just sort of fell into our lap. We didn't know that Setsuko Thurlow was going to be in Hiroshima. We've been wanting to have her speak to our group for 20 years, and we finally had an opportunity tonight because she's in town when we are. I met Setsuko in 2009 when we both spoke at a conference in Toronto that Sadako actually organized in 2009. And so Setsuko was in Hiroshima in 1945. And what I'm going to do, since our time is so limited, I'm going to just ask her a few questions because we don't have time enough for a full presentation. So it might be quicker and easier if I just ask Setsuko a few questions. Sadako, do you want to just translate some of that? The debate over dinner was if Sadako had 2 beers, which you were able to translate afterwards. And so there was a debate whether or not that was a good idea. Yeah. She's told us that she'd be fine. Some of us who have known her for a while were a little dubious.
Live up to my pledge. サーロー節子さんです。はい、お忙しい中時間を作っていただきまして予定になかったんですけど私たちのグループに話していただくということでトロントにお住まいで2009年に救助についての会議を、私がオーガナイズしたものですがそこでピーター・カズミクと節子サーローさんが会いまして、それ以来ですねで今日はちょっと通訳してる時間があまりないということもあって、サーローさんには英語で話していただいてで後で私は日本語で簡単な要約をするというような話になっているんですが、それでいいでしょうか。はい、なるべく頑張って聞いてください。
I guess to set the context, my first question for Setsuko is, where were you on August 6th? How old were you? What was the impact on you? Very, very briefly, Setsuko could talk about this for an hour. And just what happened on August 6th, so we can set the context for the next question that I wanted to ask.
Okay. I told them that I'm just going to summarize the whole thing because she doesn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So please just go on.
Yeah. Shall I?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, is it working? Hello?
Yeah, I think it's working. Yeah.
Can you hear in the back?
I am hard of hearing, so I may speak louder than other normal people. But yes, I was here in this city on August 6, 1945. I was a 13-year-old, grade 8 student. And in those days, Japan was desperately fighting and fast losing. So they had to depend on young girls and boys to help with the war purpose. Most of the able-bodied young men were sent to the front. We had to look after themselves. Well, instead of having the regular academic work in school, in the classrooms, we were mobilized to help various causes. We were sent to the cigarette tobacco company to prepare the packs of tobacco to send to the soldiers fighting at the front. We were sent to the Hifukusho, that's clothing factories for the military. We had to make sure the buttons are at the right place for the soldiers fighting at the front. And we were sent to the farm to help the farmers to do tawe, rice planting, or digging up the sweet potatoes and so forth, or other things. And well, we were doing this kind of physical, manual labors for the sake of the city as well as for the military purpose. Well, just about 3 weeks prior to the bombing, I was selected to be one of about 30 girls to be sent to the army headquarters to be trained to decode secret messages. Can you imagine 13-year-old girls were used to do such important top secret jobs? On that very day, which happened to be Monday, at 8 o'clock, we were on the second floor of the wooden building, about 1 mile, 1.8 kilometer away from the hypocenter. And we were having the morning assembly. The man who was in charge of our students, Major Yanai, was giving us the pep talk. And then he said, okay, you go and prove your patriotism to the emperor. We said, yes, sir, we'll do our best. And at that moment, I saw the bluish-white flash in the window. And I do remember the sensation of floating up in the air because of the strong blast generated by explosion. All the buildings are being flattened, and the building I was in was falling, and together with that, my body was falling. After that, I lost my consciousness, I don't remember. But when I regained my consciousness in the total darkness and silence, it was an eerie silence, actually. And I thought, well, finally, this is happening. And I knew I was faced with death because I couldn't move my body. I was stuck. It's interesting. I never packed. I never panicked. I was very serene. That's very interesting. I think neurologists or psychiatrists or somebody have to study that. Nothing has been done so far. But anyway, all of a sudden, I started hearing faint voices of the girls around me. Mother, help me. I am here. God, help me. I can still hear those voices. Then, all of a sudden, the very strong male voice shouted at me, and he was shaking my left shoulder from behind. Don't give up. Keep pushing. Keep kicking. I'm trying to free you. And you see some sun ray coming through the opening, and crawl toward it as quickly as possible. And obviously he loosened me, so I was able to crawl out in the total darkness. By the time I came out, the rebels were on fire. That meant about 30 other girls who were with me in the same room were being burnt alive. Actually, 2 other girls managed to come out. So 3 of us spent the day together. But anyway, although it what happened in the morning, when I came out, it was very dark. Dark as twilight. Because of all the dust and smoke and the particles in the air was just rising up in the air. Then after a while, my eyes began to see some moving dark objects coming approach me. And the soldier said, you girls join those people and escape to the nearby hillside. Well, I can't say it was procession of human beings because they simply did not look like human beings. The funny thing I noticed was all the long hair women were wearing, they were raised or rising straight up. And the parts of the bodies were missing, and they are burned, bleeding, and swelling, and nobody was shouting or yelling. Nobody was saying, hey, I'm in trouble, help me. If they said anything, they just whispered for water. Please give me water. And nobody was running either. They simply didn't have that kind of physical, psychological strength. They just shuffled from the center part of the city to the outside of the city. Well, as the soldiers ordered us, we three girls joined this procession of ghosts, what I call, and we escaped to the foot of the hill. The people who live in Hiroshima, you know, former Higashi Renpeijo of Futabanosato. That's the area we escaped. At the foot, well, on the way to the area, we have to be very careful to step over the dead bodies because everywhere was covered with the dead bodies and dying people. And as most of the people just raised their arms to that length and all the flesh and skin hanging. And somebody told me later on they were doing so in order to lessen the pain. Apparently, if they were higher than the chest level or something, well, someday the doctors can explain that to you. But then, as they escape one by one, they collapse and fall, and that's it. And as they fall, their stomach bursts open, intestine stretching out, and the gross sight we saw, I never thought it was gross at that moment. We were in a psychic numbing condition, we just didn't feel. But some people were carrying their eyeballs. It's pretty gross, as I remember it now. Then, as we got to the foot of the hill, there was a large military training ground about the size of 2 football fields combined, and the place was packed with dead bodies and dying people, heavily injured people. Everybody was simply begging for water. But there was no cups and no bucket to carry the water, even if we wanted to help. So we 3 girls who were lightly injured, we went to the nearby stream, we washed off the dirt and the blood and everything, and then we tore off our blouses and we soaked them in the stream, and then we dashed to the dying people. We put those wet cloths over the mouths of dying people. They just sucked in the moisture like, and then they say thank you, and then that's it. And we kept doing that all day, and when the darkness fell, we sat on the hill, just feeling stunned, just numbed from witnessing such grotesque, massive death and suffering all day. Just didn't feel. We just sat there, spent all night just watching entire city burn. That's the end of that very day. Shall I stop there?
Stop there for a minute. Right now, American University is doing a big exhibit with Hiroshima and Nagasaki and Hakawa Elementary School, and also the Maruki panels. And so I got to pick 6 of the 15 Maruki Hiroshima panels. And the first one we're showing is called Ghosts. And it's Maruki's painting, this enormous 6.5 feet high, 25 feet wide painting of a procession of ghosts. And that was your description there, perfectly captures what's in that Maruki panel, as they look like ghosts with their hands up there walking days with the fire all around, and the suffering and the skin hanging off, and people naked. It really looked like this procession of ghosts. So tell us where your family was and what happened to your family that day.
My father left the city early in the morning. He happened to have a free day, so he wanted to enjoy fishing. He was away near Miyajima. You know where Miyajima is?
They're going to all go there on the 6th.
Okay, that's where he was fishing. And from the boat, he saw the rising mushroom cloud in Hiroshima way, so he thought something happened, he better go home. So he went back to shore and took the train part way, and the train wouldn't go any further. So he started walking toward the city, and what he saw in the city was just horrendous. But somehow he managed to walk back to where his house had stood. I think it was about mid-afternoon he got there, and of course the house was not standing anymore. He saw the rubble, but the fire hadn't started yet. So the fire must have started after the mid-afternoon of that day. Well, my mother was doing the dishes after breakfast, and she too was buried under the collapsed building. But she was rescued, she was dug out, and she escaped to her brother's place outside the city. But the sad story is, my married sister with a 4-year-old child, she wanted to protect the child from the anticipated air raid. So they had evacuated into the country. But the night before, she came back to visit us. My father was not very pleased. He didn't want to see a little child back in the city. But anyway, she said that she wanted to see the medical doctor the next day. She couldn't find a good doctor in the country. So she too left the house, and they were walking on the Yanagibashi, and that's where both of them were practically melted. We put the pieces of the story from the neighbors and other people who witnessed them that day. The story is that my sister, with the almost dead son, she just crawled back to where our house had stood, and she was seen by somebody in the neighborhood madly digging something in the in the location where the kitchen was situated. And later I found out she was looking for isshobin, the cooking oil, because common knowledge at that time was if you have burn, you put the oil. So she was desperately looking for, and she found the isshobin in the big bottle with the cooking oil. But she was crawling, she couldn't walk, the child was dying. Here's the isshobin, the big bottle. How could she manage to get wherever she wanted to go? So apparently she asked somebody in the neighborhood, and please help her with the child and this bottle. Anyway, to make a long story short, they managed to escape to the hillside near where I was. And there was a relative's summer house. Why she chose that house, I don't understand. Nobody knows. But she chose that place to escape to. Well, next morning on the 7th of August, in the crowds up on the hill, the soldiers said, is there Setsuko Nakamura? So I said, yes, here I am. Well, your parents are here. I was surprised. And both of them came and saw me and told me what happened to my sister. They heard that my sister was nearby with the son, and that's where we were heading. So we went there. In one room, the roofs were all torn up, but still, that was a house. Both of them kept drinking water all day, all night. And it was painful to hear my sister saying how guilty she felt because she promised to her husband, who was at the front, who was in the army, and she promised to protect the child as best as she could. But she knew she failed to protect the child, and she felt very guilty about it. She kept apologizing. It's amazing until the last minute she was expressing this. Let me add a few more things, because to me this is the most painful part of my memory of that day. So, in agony, they lasted for a few days. When they died, soldiers came, they dug the hole in the ground, they threw the bodies into the ground, poured the gasoline, and threw the lighted match, and with the bamboo sticks, they kept turning the body this way. Hey, the stomach is half burned, the brain is not quite done yet. Very crude remarks. I guess they were in numbed condition. They just weren't feeling it was their job. And there I was, 13-year-old child, and my parents just standing and watching this unceremonious cremation of my sister and her dear child. And I remember standing there for some time. And later on, I kept remembering that situation. And I started asking myself, what kind of a human being am I? My dear sister and her 4-year child, in last minute, in agony. But I just couldn't remember. I searched my brain, but I couldn't remember that I shed tears. And that troubled me, that memory troubled me for a long time, until I went to university later on and started learning psychology, and especially how human beings behave in an ultimate condition such as that. It was a good thing I did some study in that area. Until then, I kept wondering what kind of human being I was. But somehow, to put it simply, Dr. Rifkin talked about, and I think his theory was the right one, in a situation like that, stimuli is too massive, too grotesque, too overpowering, and the cessation of the emotion takes place. And it was a good thing it happened. If it didn't happen, I couldn't have functioned in that circumstance. If you're reacting to every horror, you couldn't. We just weren't responding to such stimuli. So after doing some study, I talked with Dr. Rifkin about that too. But anyway, learning about that theory was very helpful to me. I was able to forgive myself. I wasn't such a inhuman or inhumane human beings. That happened to many people. I read many testimonies, I talked with many people, and they all seem to have experienced a similar situation. So I wasn't exceptional or abnormal. But anyway, that was helpful. I was able to forgive myself. So,
Robert Lipton is one of my very close friends, and he wrote a book, the first real study about the hibakusha, called Death and Life. And he talks about the concept of nuclear numbing, which Setsuko is talking about, that somehow the experience is so overwhelming that you can't deal with it. In the same sense, we can't contemplate nuclear war except briefly, and then we have to put it out of our minds because the concept is overwhelming in that way and just destroys one's cognitive processes. Unfortunately, Robert just had a very serious stomach surgery, but he seems to be recovering, which I'm very glad.
but some things he said, I disagree.
A lot of hibakusha do. Yeah.
A lot of people do, that's
Yeah.
right. For
But even
example,
the title, though, the book, Death
I
and
know.
Life, but that was not the title he chose. Right? That was the way it was
the
translated.
translation wasn't
Yeah.
exactly adequate either. But the one point he emphasized, survivor guilt. People around me all died, but I happen to be alive. Therefore, I feel guilty. That's how he described the psychological condition of the survivor. Of course, I feel the pain, enormous pain, when I remember those people and what happened to them, what happened to me. But I don't feel guilty because I'm alive. I'm grateful I'm alive. And I went through a long process of integrating everything. And as a result, I felt my job is to tell the world what happened, what the nuclear weapons did to people in my city, so that we can warn the people and we be smart enough not to let that happen again. And that's the most important thing I have to do. That's the sense of mission I have.
That's why you were 13 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
When did you first start speaking out publicly about this?
I think, Japan surrendered, Japan became so-called free and democratic nation. Everybody was happy, the war ended, now we have the peace. So Hiroshima became a pacifist city in a way. Everybody was for peace. And we all made a vow to our loved ones, we'll do our best that this will never happen again. But his question was, when did I start publicly at the
It was
pulpit.
very difficult for most of the Hibakusha to actually be able to
Right,
share that.
right.
It was too painful.
Yeah, everybody had different situation, and I had special situation, and that got me started. Well, that was in 1954. I graduated from the university here, and I had the offer of scholarship to study in the United States. And I accepted it. I went there in 1954. That year was a very special year for human history, perhaps more strongly felt by the Japanese. That's when the Bikini incident took place. Some of you know what that meant. United States tested the largest hydrogen bomb at the Bikini Atoll in Marshall Islands. And, causing the environmental damage, health problems. Everything was upside down in that part of the world. And Japanese were very, very upset. Not only Hiroshima, not only Nagasaki, now Bikini. When is America going to stop behaving this way? And that was the beginning of the biggest social movement in history of Japan. The peace movement became a real issue at that time. Anyway, at that time, I left Japan, went to the United States. So, in Virginia, they thought, well, survivor is coming from Hiroshima. So, there was a press conference. And young, naive things, and just a few days after arriving in the States, asked such questions. I honestly told everything I felt inside. And lo and behold, next day I started receiving unsigned hate letters, threatening letters. I just arrived. I couldn't go back. What am I going to do? How am I going to live in this country? Am I going to pretend? Do I put the zipper over my mouth? I had a really traumatic week. The professor gave me his house and I was left alone. I couldn't go to the classes. It was a real lonely, agonizing time. But because of that, I think I came out with a stronger commitment. This is my job. This is my responsibility. So that was the motivating reason for me to start talking about it.
That's pretty remarkable. Did you have radiation poisoning? And did you and your parents get radiation poisoning? Did you have radiation sickness?
Well, at that time, most of the people who were in the city shared common symptoms, such as loss of hair, internal bleeding, bleeding from the gum, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, all these kind of things. Yes, I did have all of these in a smaller dosage and degree. Yeah. A few months later, I was okay. But in October, people said, well, the school was going to open in the suburb, and we were happy to go and see who survived. It was an interesting sight. The people who survived started coming wearing the bonnet, the quilted bonnet, which we had to wear during the wartime. In case of emergency, we had to protect our head. The war was over, but still the girls were coming to school wearing the bonnet. And we soon found out they were too shy to show their bald head. Those people who were exposed more intensely lost their hair fast. They became bald-headed. The interesting thing is this radiation works in a very random, mysterious way. And some people get killed immediately, some a week later, some years later. Well, we got the good news. My favorite uncle and aunt were all right. They had no visible external sign of injury. But then they started acting sick, very sick. So after my sister and her son died, my parents went to my uncle's place, started looking after him and his wife. Their bodies were covered with purple spots all over. And according to my mother, their internal organ seemed to be rotten and coming out as a thick black liquid. They needed diapers. She used everything possible to use diapers. That's, you see, radiation you can't see, you can't taste, you can't smell. It just penetrates into your body and affects that way. This kind of things were happening.
How was your parents' health?
My parents.
Your parents' health, how were they?
My father suffered from internal organ, and he died when I was in the States, 1954. But my mother lived until 105, so you never know the radiation works. Yeah.
We heard that people were told in Japan that their life was not important. The purpose of their life was to live for the emperor and to die for the emperor. What did that mean to you as a 13-year-old girl with your whole life ahead of you?
The question is, what did it mean to me then?
When you were taught that your life was not important, but the goal of your life was to live and die for the emperor.
Yeah.
I mean, this is such a foreign concept to kids today, that your life was...
I guess we never questioned that during the war. But after the war, we started thinking differently. And we started seeing horrible pictures of Japanese dying soldiers at the front. They were starved to death. There were just hundreds of thousands of people died that way. And people started questioning. They thought about futility of war. Yes, pretty soon people became, war is madness, insane, and that brainwashed way of thinking, emperor system and states, nationalism, all this. But you know, when I went to the United States in 1954, I saw the similar pattern of behavior among American people. I really, just watching the American people, just unthinkingly swallowing everything the government was feeding, I thought, gosh, this is familiar. This is the way Japanese were living during the war. In the States, after the war, they were living that way. You know, brainwashed, just uncritical, just swallowing. And I think about this nuclear issue that's happening, you know. The nuclear weapon ended the war quickly. It was good, therefore, and that's useful because we can use it to protect ourselves as deterrence. I think that kind of thinking must be very well affecting the current American people's thinking. If not, they would be working harder to get rid of the nuclear weapon, such inhumane, immoral machine of mass killing.
We often hear from Baksha, from others, and I see this as a constant theme in the movies, post-war movies about Japan where people say war is the enemy. We've got to get rid of war. In war, people will do anything. And they rarely blame the United States. Mayor Hideoka spoke to us earlier today, and his presentation was unique in that he was saying that it's important to blame, that Truman gave the order, that the United States conducted the atomic bombing, and that the blame should be on the United States. But the United States has a tendency, for example, Barack Obama chose not to prosecute Bush and Cheney for war crimes, which makes it easier for future presidents in the United States to conduct war crimes. How did you feel toward the United States, an American responsibility, not that war is the enemy, but that American leaders chose to use atomic bombs when there was no justification to do so? It was not necessary. The bombs did not end the war. I mean, how did you process that as an intelligent, critical thinker during that time?
It took many years to learn about history and everything else related to nuclear weapons. Nobody was ready to make analysis and respond to the kind of question you're raising because Japan was isolated. You see, after surrender, we had 7 years of occupation by the United States, mostly, by the Allied forces, but mostly U.S. armies, General MacArthur. So we were not really free. We were controlled. Maybe I should mention a couple of things about that. Well, General MacArthur said as he came, I came here to Japan to accomplish 2 things. One is to demilitarize Japan. Secondly, to democratize Japan. And he did some good job. Several things like agriculture reform, women's position, and labor movement, and some good things. But as far as the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are concerned, I must tell you some negative things. You see, United States were happy for the world to discover what a wonderful triumph they experienced by producing successfully such destructive weapons. That was good news for them. The world was to hear about it. But the world was not to discover the human misery the nuclear weapon inflicted on humanity. That was to be hidden. That was not to be heard by the world. So, in order to do that, they started censorship of the publication. Some newspapers, like Asahi Shimbun, was forced to close for some time. And on top of that, they started confiscating things like people's diaries, letters. When people were suffering, they have to express their emotions by writing. So they wrote a lot of poems, photographs, films, even medical specimens. All these personal human things were confiscated. 32,000 items in all. And they were shipped to the United States away from Japan. And years later, when Japanese found out there were certain pictures about them which was kept in the States, we had to start 10 feet movement. We made $1,000 yen or 300 yen to buy 10 feet of film back from the States. We called it 10 feet movement? We have to pay for the film about that, which was stolen and kept in the United States. And with that purchased film. The Japanese made 3 films out of that. Now, another point I must say is that in the fall that year, United States established something called ABCC, Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission, in Hiroshima and in Nagasaki. People thought, well, they knew that we didn't have any medications, and doctors didn't know how to deal with the special medical condition. Maybe they would help us. No, the sole purpose of the ABCC was to study the effects of radiation on human body, but not to offer any help. We have somebody in this audience who had the direct contact with that institution. She can tell you about it.
She did yesterday.
Huh?
She did tell me yesterday.
She has, yes. And that's, what do you think? That's pretty inhuman thing to do, isn't it? To test those uranium type and plutonium type of bombs on 2 different cities, and now they wanted to study the effect of those 2 bombs. Now, I was going to respond to you after that. I just wanted to give a couple of examples of how we get. What was your question I wanted to come back to? How did I feel? How did we feel
About the United States, the question of responsibility. Whether war is the enemy, or if war is responsible, or American leaders were responsible.
Yeah. Well,
And Truman in particular.
so many people said, well, it's the war which is the problem. I think something phony about that. That's a protective measure, you know. People who don't want to accuse or criticize or something, they come up with that kind of phony statement. Now, often when I visit various schools in the United States, in Canada, and everywhere, the same question come up. Do you still hate us American? So my answer to that is usually, we have no reason to be angry at American people because they were in the dark just like the rest of the world was as far as the Manhattan Project was. Nobody knew that secretly such things were being produced and such things were being contemplated to be actually used. So how can we be angry at American people? But there was a small group of bomb managers, decision makers, who thought carefully and came up with that decision. I think this small group of people, like Truman in the center, and Close, and Burns, and Stimson, those people, I think they committed crime against humanity. But of course, the United States won. So nobody tries such crime. That's the way the world is. The victors don't get tried. Now, you have to direct me. When I start talking, I lose the train of thought.
I think, unfortunately, we're running out of time, so let me ask one last
Okay.
question. I think we've gone about a half hour, more than we were supposed to already, and that's without translation. So let me say, Gomen Nasai to the Japanese
Yes,
students.
I'm sorry about
I
that.
hope you've been able to understand. Sadako's been taking notes, but I think it would be impossible to summarize. So we'll get you the video so that you can watch it slowly and make sense out of it, because you're missing, if you're not understanding what Setsuko's saying, you're missing something very, very special. But my last question is, what is your message to the younger generation? What do you want them to know about what about your experience in your life and the atomic bombing and their responsibility and the future.
I want you to find out what kind of world you're living in. This is a different world from the kind I remember as a child. This is a nuclear age. What does nuclear age mean? And that's what you have to find out. You have to do a lot of reading in many fields: science, history, political science, international relations, practically everything. You can't be experts in everything, and you don't need to, but you need certain knowledge in various. Only then you can understand fully what this nuclear age is all about, what this means to humanity, not just you and me, but to this species. Unless you have the knowledge, we have the knowledge, we can't take responsible action. And I think it's about time all of us, but especially Americans, because most of you seem to be American, I am advising that you really do some critical thinking and take appropriate action. Work with the politicians. They make stupid decisions from time to time, and you have to be part of that decision making in order to rescue this dying planet. Really, it could die any moment. And this is my point. Right now, something exciting is happening. I have been watching what's going on as far as the nuclear disarmament goes. For many decades, people have been sleeping and hiding their heads in the sands. But right now, some exciting things are happening. Majority of non-nuclear weapon states, a party to non-proliferation treaty, feel that they have waited expecting nuclear weapon state to fulfill their legal obligation to work toward disarmament, but they haven't done a thing. They haven't. So they're saying, we can't wait anymore. We can't depend on you. No leadership, no initiative is coming from you. Then we don't have nuclear weapons, but we have numbers. We have to work together. So right now, 113 nations pledged to work with some non-nuclear weapon states, which has been providing leadership, like Austria, Ireland, Mexico, Norway, and so on. The conference is called humanitarian conferences. Humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. And the first one took place in Norway, in Mexico, and Vienna. And I am grateful to be part of that and just see the change in the world. And lots of young people getting wakened up to the reality, especially in Europe. I just came back from Germany. And so states and NGOs and international society like International Red Cross Society, and they are all working together. Now, actually, this NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, which took place in New York in May, is considered to be a failure because they failed to produce the final document. But many people don't quite feel it was exactly a failure just because it didn't happen. Because at that conference, I think nuclear weapon states made it very clear they had no intention of getting rid of nuclear weapons. Now, the rest of the member states can go ahead, and I think something is going to happen. And waiting for September UN conference starts. I think something is going to happen. I feel it.
Good.
So let's all study and work together at this way, join this movement. Okay, thanks.
That's good. That was brilliant. Thank you.